It is Wednesday, November 23rd here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 12 preview podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, Jared Smola. And Jared, it is the day before Thanksgiving as we speak. The 3-game Thanksgiving Day slate is ahead of us as usual. I'll be traveling to my in-laws this evening. So we're doing this thing a little bit early. The format's going to be a little bit different than most weeks. Not going to hit every single game, but going to hit lots of players that people are wondering about as they set these lineups.
Yeah, my least favorite week of the year, trying to jam 5 days of work into 4, no teams on bye. And I freaking look tired. My God, I look awful.
Yes, everyone, if you're listening to this, don't tune into YouTube because then you'll see how old Jared and I really are. But yeah, it's a tough week. I don't like Thursday games in general because it shortens everything just for the purpose of one early kickoff. This is even worse because we get the first one at 12:30 on Thursday, then another. It's just like extra deadlines that you have to hit with everything. And I mean, that's obviously primarily a complaint for those of us doing fantasy projections and content, but it makes it more difficult for people who are setting lineups. I mean, you got to wait and see on injury situations. You have to make decisions on guys, like one guy that's playing Thursday or one guy that you'd rather play that's Sunday, but he might not be ready for that game. And you got to figure it out by Thursday. You know, we'll talk about some of that stuff. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, we don't have any more information than you guys do. So, you know, we'll do our best to read what's going on.
Yeah, we'll get the one practice report today before Thursday's game. I like the island games. I like being able to watch as many games as possible, but it does make it more complicated for fantasy, especially FFPC final week of the regular season there. So it's a big week in high stakes country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Mike and Adam talked about that on the deep end yesterday. You can find that episode both on draftsharks.com and on the YouTube channel. You can find all the rankings and projections on the site. We'll certainly keep tweaking those as the week moves forward, but you can find the Week 12 rankings by position now for PPR, half PPR, non-PPR scoring. You can find flex and IDP rankings as well to help you make lineup decisions. For your absolute best lineup recommendations, I would recommend hitting the My Leagues in the menu at the top of either the site or the app. That's going to bring up every team that you have synced to draftsharks.com. From there, you click the team intel button. That will tell you who we would recommend putting in your lineup. It's literally going to say, these are the players that we would start in your specific format. So I know that's a big help for me when I'm scrambling to set all of my lineups before whatever game in a given week. There's also the free agent finder there, Jared. You can also access all of your teams. You can not only see who the best available players are in each league that you have there, but you can also just do a quick search for wherever a player might be available. And that comes up this week because we had the Broncos waive Melvin Gordon. We had the Rams release Darrell Henderson. So if you're like, crap, I wonder if Latavius Murray is available anywhere in any of my leagues, what am I going to do? You go to the free agent finder, you can hit search all leagues for Latavius Murray, find out if he's available anywhere and jump on him there. Same deal for either of the Rams running backs, who we'll talk about later.
Yeah, I'd be even more tired if I didn't have the free agent finder and my team. That stuff is part of my weekly process. I have my league page up on one monitor, my team free agent finder up on the other, and I can go back and forth, and it definitely makes the process easier and quicker.
And talking about the island games, it's a great opportunity, I think, to play pick'ems, to play over-unders. My Underdog Pick'ems article comes out every Wednesday. It's up on the site now. It's loaded this week. There are 31 players. I even added one after I had originally posted it. 31 player props in that one, matches the season high. There are 12 for the Thanksgiving Day games alone. Just among those 3 games, we got a Dak Prescott boost on Underdog. So if you haven't played on Underdog before, you can hit promo code DraftSharks. Let me put that up on the screen for anybody who wants to see. So hit that promo code DraftSharks. You'll get your first deposit matched, and then you can build your pick'ems. Check the article. We've got lots of stuff in there, and the article tells you how the picks have done this year, so you don't have to take my word for it that they're valuable. Now, Jared, let's move on to the rest of the Week 12 action. And the big news today is the Jets benching Zach Wilson. It's not necessarily a huge thing for fantasy, but it's noteworthy, at least for the offense moving away temporarily from a quarterback that has not been getting it done for us, not been helping the talented skill players that are around him.
Yeah, I don't think it can be bad news for this Jets offense. I don't know if Mike Waite's going to be an upgrade. We saw him for parts of 4 games last season, 67% completion rate, 7.2 yards per attempt, 5 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. across those 4 games, a 6% interception rate. The Jets threw it a bunch in those games, which kind of inflated everything. They averaged 47.5 pass attempts per game. We saw the Jets go pass heavy early on this season with Joe Flacco under center. I don't think that's going to be the case. I don't think they're going to revert back to a pass leaning offense. I think it's going to remain run heavy, especially this week against the Bears, who most offenses have gone run heavy against. So I'm still not super excited about any piece of this passing game this week, and we'll kind of reevaluate it after White's first start on Sunday.
Yeah, I think this will be a sluggish, low-scoring game, especially if Justin Fields can't play. We're still waiting to see on that, but we'll talk about him in a few minutes. Mike White, I think the first thing people are going to think, oh, this is great for Michael Carter because the running back targets were awesome when Mike White stepped in last year. So I would just caution that it's a 4-game sample. 3 starts there. Really, when we're talking about it being awesome for Michael Carter's targets, we're mostly talking about 2 games where he racked up 23 targets. There was no Garrett Wilson on the team at that point. The tight ends are better now than they were then. Even Corey Davis missed 2 of those Mike White games. So I'm going to bet the under on 23 targets for Michael Carter over the next 2 weeks. And if he does get targeted that heavily, even the 16% target share that he got over that span, if it's that much, it's probably not a good sign for the way things are going for the Jets offense.
Yeah, and 16% that's a good number for a running back. It's not as high as I thought it was when I went to go look it up like an hour ago. Again, Carter's volume was a lot because the Jets threw it 47.5 times per game. The other thing, obviously it's a different season. Last week, Michael Carter ran a route on just 37% of the Jets pass plays. That was about half of the running back routes. We saw Ty Johnson and James Robinson mix in too. So if he's only going to be running a route on a third of the pass plays, like, it's tough to project big passing game volume. So Carter did move up our rankings a little bit with the quarterback change, but he's still in running back 3 territory in PPR, and in non PPR, he's outside our top 35 backs.
And just to add a little context, if we get 30 pass attempts, a 16% share is 4.8 targets. So that's a solid number, but we're not talking about huge stuff. So don't get too excited, slight bump. Just don't get carried away. And again, I don't think that Mike White is a boost for everybody else. It's good that they're not playing Zach Wilson because he has stunk. So it's at least good to take a shot and see if somebody else stinks less. But I don't think I'm more likely right now to play Garrett Wilson than I was yesterday. What about you?
No, yeah, I didn't move Wilson at all in our projections. He's still like high-end RB or high-end wide receiver 4, I think. We'll see. Again, I don't think moving away from Wilson can be bad news for Garrett Wilson. But again, especially in this matchup, I don't think the Jets are going to throw it a whole lot. So, Wilson is still kind of an unexciting fantasy play this week.
And it didn't stop there on the crappy QB news desk. Mike Garafolo reports that the Texans are going to start Kyle Allen this week against the Dolphins. Lovie Smith would neither confirm nor deny that in his press conference, but it sounds like Kyle Allen will probably start this week. Not sure that makes a huge difference, although it might be interesting for DFS purposes because playing the Dolphins has been a potential shootout spot all season.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm not to DFS yet this week. I can't imagine pulling the trigger on Kyle Allen. I don't think he's going to be a significant upgrade over Davis Mills. And Davis Mills has been bad this season, so I don't think it's going to be a significant downgrade either. It just adds more uncertainty to the situation. Like, I thought Brandon Cooks and Nico Collins were in play as wide receiver 3s in this matchup. Texans playing from behind, passing volume likely going to be up, but again, it adds more uncertainty to both guys' profiles this week.
Mm-hmm. And then the Rams might have to play Bryce Perkins this week. He's going to be getting first team reps because Matthew Stafford is in the concussion protocol, likely out after suffering another one last week. And then John Wolford is also hurt.
Yeah, Wolford was a full go in practice last Friday. So I kind of had been assuming that he'd be ready for this game, but maybe the Rams just want to go with Perkins to see what he can do. It's not like Wolford's the answer short-term or long-term. So Perkins can at least run a little bit. He might be an interesting DFS guy just because of the rushing ability. But as we've seen all season, this Rams offense is not one you really want to be invested in.
Yeah, and the Rams look like they're in why not phase of the season. See what we've got because this season's not happening. So let's move on now to some players who will actually factor in to our starter decisions. And we're going to go position by position today, starting at quarterback. And the first quarterback up is Lamar Jackson. Jared, what are you doing with Lamar Jackson this week? How worried are you about him in general?
Yeah, I'm worried. I mean, I've been worried. It's been since week 3 since we've seen like a ceiling game from Lamar Jackson. Now he hasn't really been killing you. Like he's been finishing like quarterback 10, quarterback 12, somewhere in low end quarterback 1 range. Obviously not what you drafted him as. He's not a must start, but he's like 7th in our rankings this week. Like I think Geno Smith and Tua Tagovailoa are probably the 2 guys you might have paired with Lamar Jackson that I'd start him over. The scary part about not starting Lamar is just the upside. Like to me, I actually wrote down here, I think he's like Justin Fields ish at this point, where the passing projection is not good, but like Lamar Jackson still has the elite rushing upside. He can still run for 100 yards and a score. And if he does that, like, he's a strong fantasy play regardless of what the passing is. So that's the thing. I think you're still, benching 30-point upside if you're benching Lamar Jackson.
That is the fear when you're deciding whether to play Lamar Jackson, but he has not shown that upside for quite a while. From week 4 on, he's had just 2 games of 20 plus fantasy points and a high of 24.2. So he hasn't shown that ceiling that makes you like kick yourself for benching Lamar. Certainly can outscore the guy that you played over him, but I think that the fear there is not founded in what he's actually doing. And I look at week 4 because that's the game that Rashad Bateman left early. So looking back to when Bateman was healthy and on the field, the first 3 games of the season, Jackson had passer ratings of 98.3, 142.6, 110.3. He had 8.5 yards per pass attempt over that span and 10 touchdown passes. That included wins over the Jets and Patriots. Maybe those defenses are just better now than they were at that point in the season, but those are at least defenses that have been good since then. Since the game where Bateman went down, including that week 4, Lamar is at just 79.8 passer rating, 6.08 yards per attempt, 6 touchdown passes in 7 games. In that span, he is tied for QB 15 in fantasy points per game. So he's been bad, and especially bad relative to what we expected when we drafted him.
Yeah, and I'm not expecting the passing production to get better. Again, I think you project him similar to like Fields at this point, like 180 passing yards, maybe a touchdown, maybe 2 if you get lucky. But Lamar has double-digit carries in 2 straight games and 3 of his last 4 games, and I think 6 total games this season. Like, it's still tough for me to bench a quarterback with that type of rushing floor and ceiling. Again, he can go for 100 rushing yards. He also has the matchup on his side, this favor. Man, Jacksonville's defense for the first month of the season, we were like, is this a top 10, top 5 defense? Over the last 5 weeks, the Jags are 31st in Football Outsiders defensive DVOA. They're 30th against the pass, 21st against the run. The Ravens have a decent 24-point implied total this week. It's 9th highest on the week. So it's the matchup, I think, elevates Jackson's fantasy profile this week.
I absolutely agree that the matchup elevates him, but that to me puts him in the top 12 as opposed to putting him inside the top 8. I would play over him. I would play Geno Smith against the Raiders. I'd play Tua against the Texans. Yep. I would play Dak Prescott over him because I think the floor at least is higher. I'm probably playing Tom Brady, who over that same span since week 4, despite his touchdown issues, has been QB 11 in points per game. The matchup is certainly good for Lamar Jackson, but he's also had positive recent matchups with the Panthers, Saints, Browns, and Giants where he just didn't deliver. So he needs to show me that he's actually dangerous before I guess I had to talk myself. I had to realize that I shouldn't be as scared to sit Lamar Jackson because he just hasn't shown that ceiling.
Yeah, again, I'm good with Geno and Tua over Lamar. I would start those guys over Lamar. I think they have similar floors and not quite as much upside. I mean, Tua's upside rivals Lamar's at this point. Now, I don't think Geno has the same upside, but I think you factor in the floor. I'm good. Yeah, and Geno gets the Raiders, which boosts him. So outside of that, though, I'm sticking with Lamar over those other guys you mentioned.
Justin Fields up next. The shoulder is hurt. It's dislocated. It's not dislocated. The latest sounds like it's not dislocated. He is considered day-to-day. He's taken part in their practice today, but it's just a walkthrough. So we don't know whether he would have actually participated in a real practice. So we're going to have to watch Justin Fields' participation through this week. If you have to decide between him and a Thursday quarterback, then you probably need to go ahead and play the Thursday quarterback.
I'd probably try to drop that Thursday quarterback for someone on Sunday so you can wait further. I don't know. I'd have to think through the specifics. I mean,
let's look at who there are because there really aren't that many decisions. The decisions here are Daniel Jones, Dak Prescott, and Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, Dak I'd play over Fields. Jones would be the toss-up. If Cousins is my backup, I'd dump Cousins for someone on Sunday. I don't think you're missing anything this week or going forward with Kirk Cousins. The Daniel Jones one is tough. Again, we'll get, we have another 24 hours before that game kicks off, so we'll see. I mean, the fact that Fields was clear to practice, I'm leaning towards him being able to play. Now, it's a left shoulder injury for Fields, so it's not his throwing shoulder, but I think that's going to impact his willingness to run, his ability to break tackles. Maybe I'm not saying he's not going to run, but I think, we have his rushing projection lower than it had been. And that's partly because of the shoulder, partly because of the matchup. I mean, this is the first tough matchup he's faced in a while. So, Fields is like in low end quarterback one territory this week. And I'm not sure for me, he'd climb much, even if we get confirmation that he's playing.
Yeah, for me, the concern is the risk of re-injury. And I mean, obviously we're always guessing on that, but all of this is really an educated guess. So I think Justin Fields heading into the game with a left shoulder injury increases his chances of leaving that game early versus other guys around him. So that's what would keep me from moving him up. The fact that he's playing the Jets certainly doesn't help him because they have been tough on defense and they certainly have guys capable of delivering the kind of hits that could knock him out of that game early. So it's a tough situation. I agree. I would play Dak Prescott over him. Daniel Jones and Kirk Cousins would both be tough for me. I agree that I'm not expecting a lot from Kirk Cousins against the Patriots this week. Daniel Jones against Dallas is tough. That one would depend on what else is on the waiver wire. Like if you're in the kind of league where Jimmy Garoppolo is still out there and that's a Sunday option, then I'd be fine with not playing Daniel Jones and waiting to see what happens with Fields.
Yeah, I don't feel great about Jones. He did run for 79 yards in the first meeting with Dallas, but he's going to be missing 3 more O linemen tomorrow. Beyond what they'd already been dealing with injuries along the O line. So that Dallas pass rush against what that O line is going to be out there, that could be an issue. So I would have no problem with cutting Jones for a Sunday guy if you're waiting on Fields. I think it's close.
Mm-hmm. Kyler Murray has a hamstring injury. There's another report this week, though, Jared, that he's way ahead. That was what they said last Monday, I think, before he did not play in that game. So I don't know. What's the latest on him?
I don't get anything new on him. It seems like the Cardinals are like truly waiting for him to be back to 100% before throwing him back out there. Like he's been limited. He was limited in practice last week. I think, they could have thrown him out there on Monday night at less than 100%. So I think they're at least doing the right thing there. So that makes me feel better about getting Kyler back into fantasy lineups if he plays on this Sunday. Should be pretty fun. Could be a fun game against the Chargers. Could be a shootout. Colt McCoy's banged up too. Cliff Kingsbury mentioned like 3 body parts when talking about Colt McCoy's issue after that Monday night game. So we'll see how the situation plays out over the next couple of days.
Mm-hmm. If he does play, I'm taking him over Lamar Jackson because I think that if Kyler Murray does play, then that means the hamstring is in pretty good shape. But the way that they've been talking about it sounds like they would rather lean conservative if they're not sure about it. So I'm going to take that as a good sign that it's in good shape. And what Kyler Murray has over Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields is guys around him. DeAndre Hopkins, we should get Marquise Brown back this week. So better offensive talent. I hesitate to say better situation because the coach sucks.
Yeah, this is weird. I think I'd probably play Lamar over Kyler this week. But it's close. We'll see if Kyler has either of his slot receivers for that game because Rondell Moore got hurt and Greg Dortch hurt a thumb in that Monday night game. So both those guys look iffy for Sunday.
Mm-hmm. Streaming options, Jared. What if you don't have any of these quarterbacks or do end up with one of these guys not able to play? To me, it looks like not a week to reach, but there are a few guys that can be options. It starts with Trevor Lawrence against the Ravens. If you look at our rankings, they're 8th in pass defense DVOA though. So it's definitely not a gimme matchup. And I wouldn't be surprised if Lawrence lets us down in this one.
Yeah, not a good matchup. Jacksonville for Lawrence. Jacksonville has a 19.75 point implied total. So that's not encouraging. Lawrence though, top 10 fantasy quarterback in 4 of his last 5 games. 2 of those came because of rushing touchdowns, but he's also earned his 2 best PFF passing grades in his last 2 games, 76% completion rate, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions in those last 2 games. So he is playing better. He is giving you rushing production. Like you can't count on a touchdown, but I think you can count on 15 to 25 rushing yards out of him. So he is my favorite streamer this week. I'm with you though. There are A few decent options, no like great standout option. To me, Jimmy Garoppolo would be the next best option. He's right there with Lawrence. I'd have no issue, grabbing Garoppolo off your waiver wire instead of Lawrence if you want. Garoppolo's been a top 11 fantasy quarterback in 4 of his last 6 games. Just so many freaking weapons. It's like hard for Garoppolo to fail at this point. And the Niners have the 6th highest implied total for this week at 26.25 points. So I think Garoppolo's a better touchdown bet than Trevor Lawrence is this week for sure.
Yeah, I think Garoppolo is probably safer than Lawrence this week. 4 touchdowns last time out, 5 games of 2+ touchdowns among the past 6 games. Gets the Saints, who are still dealing with myriad injuries on defense. So I don't even know how good the defense is capable of being at this point, but it's certainly not a defense that scares you. Taylor Heineke is kind of the break glass option, because I know there are some people who are like, yeah, I need to stream quarterback, but no, Trevor Lawrence and Jimmy Garoppolo are not available, you idiots. Give me somebody who's actually on the waiver wire. I think Taylor Heineke is I have an emergency. I need a quarterback. The matchup is strong. Playing Atlanta is good for everybody on offense, but Washington does not want to lean on Taylor Heineke. 29.6 pass attempts per game with him around, under 30 pass attempts in 3 straight games, 42 pass attempts per game back when Carson Wentz was in the lineup and healthy, if we throw out the game against Chicago where he injured his finger.
Yeah, and I wouldn't expect the passing volume to be up in this game. It really just does Heineke get the touchdowns or not, because he has not thrown a touchdown the past 2 weeks, and he's finished outside the top 20 quarterbacks in fantasy points. But he had, I think, 5 touchdowns over his first 3 games, and he finished quarterback 13, quarterback 8, and quarterback 15. So, I mean, if you get lucky in the touchdown department, he can turn in a decent day. Like you said, the matchup is awesome. So, yeah, I'm with you. I would play Daniel Jones over Heineke. He's kind of the other spot starter I think that might be available that I'd stick over Heineke. But if Jones and Lawrence and Garoppolo are all gone in your league, I think Heineke's probably your next best bet.
For sure. And that's why I say this is not a week to reach for it. Like I talk about being worried about Lamar Jackson. I'm not reaching for any of these 3 quarterbacks to play over Lamar Jackson.
Agreed.
Running back, James Conner. I'm especially happy to be able to talk positively about James Conner at this point, Jared, after getting so many weeks of not being positive on him. Dominating backfield work right now, though, of course, a backfield that has shed Benjamin in recent weeks. 35 carries the past 2 weeks for James Conner, even though they got blown out last week and the starters left the game early. 13 targets over the past 3 games, and now he's in a positive spot this week.
Yep, he has a top 10 type workload usage right now, the snap rate and the route rate and his percentage of the backfield carries. Like Connor's dominating even more than I think we expected heading into the season because of Benjamin's release. And then the Chargers are dead last by a wide margin in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA over the past 5 weeks. Now they're allowing 5.7 yards per carry through running backs over that stretch. So like the concern for Conner most weeks, for me at least, is efficiency. I think he's going to be more efficient this week in this matchup. And again, I think he's a good bet for 20+ touches.
I could sure go for a James Conner week across my portfolio at this point. Najee Harris, speaking of guys that have rebounded, no games for him of 20 carries or 90 rushing yards or 4.5 yards per carry before the team's week 9 bye. In the 2 games since, he has hit all 3 of those numbers: 20+ carries, 90+ rushing yards, 4.5+ per rush. And this week might also benefit from Jaylen Warren's injury.
Yeah, Harris looks healthier. He looks more explosive since the bye week. So I do buy that the foot was probably still an issue for most of those first 9 games. But yeah, the big thing is Warren's injury. Warren lasted just 3 snaps last week before hurting that hamstring. Najee Harris ended up playing 92% of the Steelers' offensive snaps, ran her out on 79% of the pass plays, got 20 carries and 6 targets. Like that. That's the workload if you were drafting him in the first round. I think Harris is going to dominate the backfield work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what we were looking for if you drafted him. So you got to be happy right now. And it's the kind of workload where you just start him regardless of opponent and the strength of the offense. Tony Pollard is definitely not a guy that you just start regardless. Although this week, after the way he did last week, it's going to be tough to not use him. The real question mark, though, still is how much work does he get? You feel better about that right now than you do usually. He did get 15 carries last week. He was also their top receiver in that game. Now, the way that he performed as a receiver last week is both a reason to love him and a reason to be wary, because there is both lots of skill and lots of luck involved when you score 2 touchdowns from 30 and 68 yards out. That's absolutely, neither of those is probably happening most weeks. So the fact that they both came together in a single game is like this unicorn of PPR outings. Now, he did get his second most carries of the season, despite Ezekiel Elliott being back from the knee injury. The question is, does Zeke get more this week? I think it probably helps Pollard's outlook that it's a quick turnaround from that game to this, which gives less time for Elliott's knee to rebound.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that Pollard is a sell high. Like if you could get top 8 running back value in return for him. I mean, you might go to our week 12 rankings and think Pollard's too low. I mean, we have him RB 17. So not a must start, I guess, but you'd have to be stacked at running back to sit him. I'm expecting carries to be split pretty close to 50-50 going forward. I mean, how can Dallas scale back Pollard's workload much based on what he's done over the past month now? And then he did get the 6 targets last week, which is super encouraging. If he can get 12 to 15 carries and then a handful of targets with how explosive he is, how efficient he is, like I think he's a guy you're going to be you're going to want to start more weeks than not.
Yeah, I mean, he might be too low. He might also be too high, because we've had plenty of times before where we're like, why isn't Dallas giving Tony Pollard the ball more? And they came into the season saying they were going to use him more as a receiver, and it just didn't come to fruition yet. So we'll see whether this past Sunday was, the breakout for what we thought we could get from Tony Pollard, or just this blip of a game where everything went right for him. Certainly the way that he performed there, and a matchup that's not scary, makes it easier to go ahead and take a shot on him this week if you're weighing him against anyone close. Samaje Perine, talking about that area of the rankings, is somebody that I'm more wary of. I would rather lean away from him in close decisions. To me, the only reason to like Perine this week, and of course we're assuming right now that Joe Mixon's not playing, which is generally the case with a concussion the following week. I think the only reason to like Perine right now is the receiving outlook. Bengals running backs rank 4th in receptions for the year.
Yeah, that's definitely the big thing. Mixon and Perine have combined for 7.9 targets per game on a 21% target share. I don't think Perine's going to get all that. We don't have him projected for nearly all that, but I do think 15 or so % of the targets is what you're looking at for Perine, and this should be a pass heavy game plan for the Bengals against Tennessee, which again I don't think is bad for Perine, because I don't think he's going to be efficient on the ground. I don't think he's a good running back, and it's a brutal matchup against Tennessee. We'll see about Chris Evans. I think that might actually matter. He missed last week with a knee injury. He did practice late in the week. So I kind of think he's back this week. He could steal some of those passing down snaps, because that's basically the only department where the Bengals have wanted to use Chris Evans so far. So we'll see about his status. It's just a volume play with Perine, and that's how I play fantasy. Like I want the guy who I think he probably gets 20 touches in this game. That's about all I can say good for Perine. Again, I don't think he's that good, and I don't expect him to be super efficient in this matchup.
I will say he probably gets 16. I think he falls short of 20 unless he loads up on targets, which is a possibility.
Yeah, I think we have him for like 5 targets right now, which is a high mark for a running back.
Other guys around him that you're weighing him against this week, Latavius Murray's up next, and Murray's one that I prefer over Perine because I think that they're pretty similar in touch outlook. Of course, Murray's situation improved when Melvin Gordon got waived at the beginning of the week. Chase Edmonds is down with an ankle sprain. So it's basically Murray and Marlon Mack for this game. 17 carries last week for Murray, 4 targets against the Raiders. That was with Melvin Gordon still involved. Panthers now come in as the 6th most friendly matchup for RB scoring. I think it's easier to see a touchdown coming for Latavius Murray and a similar touch outlook for Samaje Perine.
Yeah, I think Murray's probably even maybe a slightly better bet for carries than Perine. I don't think he's as good of a target bet. Murray he's a below average running back at this point in his career. The Denver offense sucks. Murray's averaging 3.3 yards per carry in his 5 games with Denver. So even in this, plus matchup, it's tough to project big time efficiency. And if I had to bet, I'd call Perine a better touchdown bet just because he's on the better offense.
Now I'm curious to see how Vegas has their team totals. Do you know offhand what they're projected?
Yep, I got it right here. Denver's at 19.5. Bengals are at 22. So.
Yeah, I was surprised at the Cincinnati Tennessee game not being a little bit higher on the score front. So I would say I agree that the Bengals are more likely to score than Denver. I'm just not sure that I think it's more likely to be Perine than Murray. They're both neither of the okay. So both of these guys are guys that are only startable because of situation. I think neither is somebody that you should get overly excited about this week.
For sure, for sure. I don't think either player is good. I don't expect either player to be efficient, but they're running backs who are, very safe bets for, I think, 15 plus touches, and that's worth a lot right now.
I do also think it's a good week to stash Mike Boone where possible if you have a roster spot to play with, because, we talk about Latavius Murray not being great. He might lead the backfield in touches the rest of the way, or maybe he has a couple more games that are like a vacuum cleaner moving along, and then Mike Boone comes back from IR and gets some touches.
Definitely. Totally agree with that.
Leonard Fournette is low in our rankings this week. And Jared, I'm assuming that's primarily because we're waiting to see what's up with his hip, right?
No, I haven't projected as if he's just playing. Rachaad White started last game, and they were basically splitting work 50-50. So that's kind of, I even have Fournette projected for a bit more work than Rachaad White. I think the matchup is what has Fournette as high as he is, honestly. Cleveland's been really bad against the run lately. I think you can start Fournette and Rachaad White as, lower end RB2s, and we'll see what the workload split looks like coming out of the bye.
Yeah, very interested to see if we get another Rachaad White start, if we get more work from him. And, certainly curious to see what Fournette's participation is going to be. The indication is that it's not a serious injury. They expect him to be back, but, we'll see as the practice week gets going.
Yep.
Antonio Gibson is somebody that I would boost up and somebody that I would play ahead of both Samaje Perine and Latavius Murray. He reclaimed the lead in that backfield last week, and it's for a team that wants to run. So he still remains inefficient overall, but if he's getting those touches and especially the receiving work, as we talked about, it's a good spot. 32 carries, 6 targets over the past 2 games for Antonio Gibson. Now comes the Falcons, who are 7th best scoring matchup for running backs on the season.
Yeah, I'm good boosting Gibson up ahead of Murray and Perine. I think I'd start Gibson over those guys. Maybe not. Gibson might not be quite as safe a bet for touches, but I think he's the better player. He's going to be more efficient in this matchup against Atlanta, and maybe he is as good a bet for touches because even in positive game script last week against Houston, Gibson doubled up Brian Robinson in snaps, 46-23. You mentioned the workload split. Gibson out-carried Robinson. Of course, Gibson got the only 3 running back targets in that game. So, even if the carries are going to be split 50-50, then you're going to get all the receiving work going to Gibson. That makes him a pretty solid weekly running back too. And then he gets a boost in this matchup against Atlanta.
Mm-hmm. And as we said, an offense that wants to run the ball, so that helps the volume outlook. Yep. Isaiah Pacheco's volume outlook has been much better over the past 2 weeks. 2 straight games over 80 rushing yards, topped 100 yards against the Chargers, 31 carries over those 2 games. What do you think about Isaiah Pacheco this week?
I think he's a starter in most cases. It'd be nice if he could catch a football once, for PPR leagues. He despite the 31 carries over the last 2 weeks, he hasn't seen a target. He has run 25 pass routes in those 2 games, though. So it's not like he's not getting any chances to be targeted. Like the ball just hasn't come his way. So I don't think he's a total zero in the passing game, but I think you're starting him this week for the rushing. Chiefs are 14.5-point home favorites against, whoever the Rams are going to be starting at quarterback. So it should be a game where in the second half, they can kind of feed Pacheco. I think, he's going to get 15 to 20 carries in this game.
I wonder if he hasn't shown enough patience in the screen game yet for Andy Reid, because Andy Reid has always loved screen passing, and the way that Isaiah Pacheco runs is it's frantic. Like he looks like a puppy that just heard you say outside, and now he's at the door just waiting for you to open it. So that could be part of it. Here's one thing that makes me want to be a little hesitant on Pacheco this week. This matchup definitely favors passing. The Rams are 5th in run defense DVOA, 26th against the pass for the season. We know that the Chiefs are not going to hesitate to throw the ball if that's what the matchup says. The pass rate over expected says opponents have leaned run against the Rams this year, but they've leaned pass a little bit more recently. If you look at the Chiefs against the Titans and 49ers, the last 2 opponents they played that do play the run significantly tougher than the pass, both of those were pass-leaning approaches in those games. Pacheco, I think, is okay, but he's not a must. And then kind of the last mark semi against him is the Chiefs lead the league in going pass inside the 10-yard line. So even if you're the lead runner for this team, you're less likely to get those goal line carries than you might be for a lot of other teams.
Yeah, Pacheco's in RB3 range in our PPR rankings. Obviously climbs quite a bit in non-PPR. I think this is a game where he could have 4 carries at halftime and then, carry 12 times in the second half, maybe score late. Because again, I do think it's going to be a Chiefs blowout.
Yes, I would agree with that. And certainly Clyde Edwards-Helaire landing on IR with his high ankle sprain today does not hurt the touch outlook for either Pacheco or Jerick McKinnon. Rams running backs, Darrell Henderson is not one of those anymore, released earlier this week. So obviously the question is, who's the bet from here, Jared? What's your answer to somebody who says, which Rams running back should I pick up?
Yeah, I mean, neither ideally. They should. Akers and Kyren Williams should both be owned in leagues of 12 plus teams, just because the running back landscape. But this offense isn't getting any better. There's more injuries on the O line. Again, the quarterback situation is bad. It does look like they want Kyren Williams to be the passing down guy. 27 of his 35 snaps last week were passing plays. And he ended up getting 2 targets, 7 carries in that game. Cam Akers had 14 carries. I think that's kind of going to be the workload split, like maybe 2-1 carries in favor of Cam Akers, but Kyren Williams getting most of the passing game work. And that leaves both guys, outside of running back 3 range, even in this bad offense.
Yeah, if you're saying who do I get to start this week, I would have to lean Cam Akers because we've seen more carries from him. But if you're asking who I should stash because they have upside, probably Kyren Williams for me, basically because he's the only running back for the Rams that hasn't gotten in a fight off the field with Sean McVay based on the way things are going. I haven't read reports of them actually having fights, but they released Darrell Henderson.
Yeah.
They tried to trade Cam Akers for a couple of weeks. Kyren Williams has just been hurt. So as far as we know, Kyren Williams is the one running back on earth that Sean McVay still has positive feelings about right now.
Yeah, the Rams have a 14.75 point implied total. So that tells you, how little to expect of the offense this week. And then, Malcolm Brown and Ronnie Rivers are still on the practice squad. I think the Rams are going to elevate one of those guys and make him active. We'll see how much they play, but, it might not even be just this 2-man backfield.
Yeah, and Malcolm Brown has been involved lately, and especially surprisingly so in the passing game, I think.
Yeah. Crazy how useless this Rams offense became so quickly.
Yeah, there's definitely no must add here, but either guy can be in play. Bills running backs, Jared, what's up with the Buffalo backfield?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell people I think I'd be careful with James Cook if you expect him to be. He got 11 carries last week after getting 5 or 6 the previous few games. The Bills were negative 5% in pass rate over expected last week. That was the first time all season they've been below 0, that they've run more than expected based on game flow. I don't expect that to become a trend. You could argue that it's because of Josh Allen's injury. I think it was more the matchup. Cleveland's been so bad against the run. I think the Bills just decided to attack that way. So if the Bills go back to their usual pass heavy ways, I don't think James Cook is going to get more than a handful of carries per game. Devin Singletary still played 72% of the snaps last week. James Cook was at just 25%. So based on playing time, Singletary is still the clear leader here.
Yeah, and do you have anything on the splits between the halves? Because I don't know the numbers. I'm trying to look at it right now to see if it was pretty even run pass even in the first half. So it seems like it was part of the plan as opposed to something that they shifted to, and whether it was matchup or Josh Allen's elbow, either way, I agree that it seems like more of a temporary thing than any sort of offensive shift.
Yeah, now, the Bills get Detroit this week, so Cook could turn 6 carries into 70 yards and a touchdown. But I think he's still a low floor fantasy play.
Yeah, he's much more of a stash than somebody that you can use anytime soon. And Devin Singletary remains somebody that you can use, but also somebody who's capable of going with just single-digit carries in any given game.
Yeah, so you're going to do what he did last year and score 8 touchdowns over the final month of the season?
I'm going to bet against it, but we at least know that that's possible. And I mean, one thing that's changed in the past couple of weeks is I assumed after the Nyheim Hines trade that they were getting him because they still wanted a different answer at receiving running back. And we have seen absolutely nothing of Hines so far besides returning punts. Yeah,
I honestly think they might have traded for him to return punts because they lost Jamison Crowder, who was doing some of that, which it wouldn't be the worst move in the world. They gave up a 6th-round pick for him.
Yeah. Yep, a bigger name for us than it must be for the Bills. Hasn't done anything on offense. So I think right now, rather than assume that he's going to factor into that, we should assume that he's not and that he is there as primarily a punt returner and, more fodder for the backfield.
Yep, for sure.
We're going to go to wide receivers next, but first I want to talk about sleeper daily drafts for a minute. They just introduced these during the season. It's a good way to play the daily stuff without throwing too much money at it. You pay $1 to enter an 8-team draft. You select that team, and then, Jared, after you get this team, you get to decide whether to enter it into other bonus contests. They've got head-to-head. They've got group formats. You can choose the entry fee level, which then, of course, controls how much you're capable of winning. It pays out the top 3 spots in any of those groups. So it's an easy way to get a team, see if you like it, and then decide what to do, which is different from some other daily drafting formats. Best of all, though, you go in now. If you've never played on Sleeper before, you enter promo code DraftSharks. You get a 100% deposit match. So you can immediately be playing with free money. And then, even if you just want to play it down to that, and once you get back to your original investment, if you want to cut it off there, that's up to you. You really haven't lost anything at that point. So why not take a shot?
Yeah, really cool format. I mean, it's DFS, a lot of the same strategies where you want to be building stacks and maybe even other correlated plays, but instead of having to mess with salary caps, you're drafting, which everyone loves to do.
Yeah, and what I like about that is it more closely mirrors the original strategy of fantasy, where you are competing against other teams for players, as opposed to just, okay, who is everybody going to be starting? Obviously, once you enter that team into other contests, then that introduces more of that. But still, I whenever I do play DFS, I have more fun playing the draft format of it than I do the regular DFS format.
I love both formats. I do them both.
All right. Well, we'll be talking about that format as well in Friday's pod. But for now, we'll get back to our rundown for the weekly preview. And we're going to wide receiver, Jared. Chris Olave, after three just okay games, if you sat him last week because you were concerned, he punished you against the Rams. Yeah. So what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, that was nice to see. And the guy is awesome. So, I don't want to be too down on him, but it's worth noting his route rate was down to a season low last week, 63%. Rashid Shaheed ran more pass routes than Chris Olave. I don't know. It was an interesting game plan from the Saints. They got Taysom Hill more involved. We'll talk about him a bit later, but I think Olave will rebound to, being more closer to a full-time player. 21% target share last week after 18% the previous week in Jarvis Landry's first game back from injury. That's way down from what it had been. And that's kind of where I think it's going to settle in like the low 20s. So that type of target share in the Saints offense, I think you're probably going to find him in wide receiver 3 range in our rankings quite a bit going forward. Now, he obviously has upside well beyond that because he is an awesome player. He's a big play guy. But don't be surprised if you get some duds from Olave down the stretch here.
Yeah, and I think that's really where he belongs. He's talent-wise, he belongs higher than that, and he's certainly capable of scoring higher than that in any given week. But for a while there, he was really the only game in town. Now Jarvis Landry's back. Chris Olave was still a little bit ahead of Landry in route rate last week. Even though he was behind Rashid Shaheed, everybody was down. Alvin Kamara led the team at 69% route rate. So it's not like somebody was running 90% and then Olave was down at 63%. So we'll see where things go from there. I think that it's not as bad to sit Olave as it seemed like it was if you did last week, obviously assuming that you're sitting him for somebody very close in the rankings. And he's probably better than what he did for us the previous 3 weeks.
Yeah, 28th in our wide receiver rankings right now. So, not a must start for every team, but, still not someone you're upset to be using.
Speaking of upset, people who have A.J. Brown have not been happy lately with what he's doing. Of course, 2 games ago, he hurt an ankle early in that game against Washington, so you kind of have to throw that one out. But even last week, he got out targeted by Devontae Smith. Jared, are you worried about A.J. Brown? Should we be concerned about A.J. Brown?
No, I think last week was actually pretty encouraging. You saw a 28% target share. You want to know how the Eagles are going to replace Dallas Goedert? They're just going to target the hell out of Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. Those guys combined for 64% of the Eagles' targets last week. 36% target share for Devontae Smith, 28% target share for A.J. Brown. The one thing that's interesting and maybe a negative for Brown, his average depth of target was way down last week. It was at 7.6 yards after being around 11 yards over the first 9 games. So I think that's Goddard, them needing to replace some of that short yardage stuff. So maybe you don't get, quite the big play upside from Brown as you were getting. But again, I think the target shares are going to, consistently be at 25+%. He's going to be just fine. He's a guy I'd go out and trade for right now if you still can.
We have also had short ADOTs from Devontae Smith recently, and even looking at looking at Dallas Goedert, like you said, was at 5.2 average depth of target so far this year before getting hurt. That's down from where he was last year as well. I think that the biggest issue for AJ Brown might be the pass offense, which needs to rebound from what it's been like the past few weeks. But if you are, if you're complaining about AJ Brown overall right now, like this is the concern, is he's not clearly better than Devontae Smith, at least that we've been able to see yet. And there's a chance that he's just duking it out for targets with Devontae Smith week to week. So I agree with you. The positive here is that combined target rate, 64% for these two guys last week in the first full game without Dallas Goedert. Still leads Devontae Smith by 10 targets for the season. 9 targets in that edge, of course, came in week 1 against Detroit. So, if you want, you can say if you throw out that game, Brown's only beating Devontae Smith by 1 target for the year, which basically makes them even. But you can't throw out that game. That game counted. We know that is possible. So you got to take this kind of stuff with the good for AJ Brown.
Yeah, he's like every other wide receiver not named Cooper Kupp when he's healthy. Like they're going to have down games, but you're not benching the guy. There's nothing wrong with his usage.
Yes. 49ers, Jared, the team is just 17th in wide receiver PPR points per game, despite having big rushing numbers at that position. So I've been thinking a lot lately about whether Brandon Ayuk should be ahead of Deebo Samuel in our rankings. I wonder now if there's just too much focus on both of them because it hasn't really been that fruitful a position, although it's really concentrated among those two players. We did get Deebo out targeting Brandon Ayuk on Monday night, 9-4. We got 2 touchdowns from Brandon Ayuk. Every time I look at the rankings over at least the past 3 weeks, I'm like, wait a second, should we have Ayuk higher? I haven't really argued it because I'm not sure what to make of it. What do you make of the 49ers wideouts?
Yeah, I mean, this is where projections are tough, where we're projecting like a median baseline outcome where, I think for both these guys, the ceiling is way higher than where they're projected and the floor is quite a bit lower just because there's 4 awesome playmakers in this offense. And most weeks, one's going to get left out. Ayuk was that guy last week. He just happened to score a touchdown on both of his catches. Okay, all 4 of those guys, along with Kittle and McCaffrey, kind of had nice fantasy days. Over their last 5 games together, it's Deebo Samuel 41 targets, Brandon Ayuk 37 targets. So I think Deebo's still the preferred play because he adds the rushing stuff. But otherwise, I think they're pretty similar. I think in most cases, you're starting them as wide receiver 2s, with both guys having the potential to finish as wide receiver 1s every week.
Yeah, Monday night was actually the first time since week 5 that Deebo beat Brandon Ayuk in either targets or PPR points, but that span only included 3 shared games. We had the bye, we had 1 missed game for Deebo Samuel. So it felt like a while where Ayuk was outscoring Deebo, but it's really not as big a gap as it seemed like. So I think the rushing keeps Deebo ahead, and he has seen 4 and 3 carries in the 2 games since the bye, despite Elijah Mitchell coming back from IR to join Christian McCaffrey. So they still want him involved in the run game. And like we saw on Monday night, it doesn't necessarily hurt his target count. They're not giving him the ball on the ground rather than throwing it to him.
Yeah, you want pieces of this offense. I mean, it looks really strong. The Niners might be my pick to come out of the NFC at this point.
They were looking pretty good. We'll see where things go from here. On the AFC side, the Chiefs are a lot of people's picks, but we're talking about their wideouts, Jared, and we are kind of waiting to see exactly what the situation is going to be for this week. Kadarius Toney hurt a hamstring because he played football last week. Juju Smith-Schuster missed that game with a concussion. So, usually a concussion's been a 1-game injury this year. So what's the early take on week 12 for who's going to be available?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say right now. We know McCole Hardman's out. He's on IR. I'd be surprised if Toney plays, just considering his history and with another hamstring. And we are right now projecting Juju Smith-Schuster in. So that leave Juju and MVS and Sky Moore and Justin Watson as the top 4. Right now, Juju's the only one of those Chiefs wide receivers in starter territory. If Juju does not play, then I think Sky Moore becomes more interesting. He looked awesome to me in that Sunday night win over the Chargers. We know, he was a prospect we like. He was a 2nd-round pick. It's kind of been a slow come up for him, but they need him at this point. And even in the second half of that game, with Kadarius Toney out, Sky Moore ran her out on 60% of the pass plays. if he can get, to that number, I think he's someone that could be usable. He was available in a bunch of FFPC leagues that I'm in, which are, higher stakes leagues with bigger benches. So I think he's available in a bunch of leagues. I would definitely stash him right now. Ideally not start him this week, but I think, as early as week, 13, he could be a pretty exciting fantasy play.
I disagree with the exciting. I definitely agree that he's stashable. I just don't think that there's room for him to get to a point where we can start him above the I need somebody with some upside level, because we do still have Juju, who will be back. Even if it's not this week, it'll be soon. Kadarius Toney will probably be back at some point. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is still around, and I'm not excited about him either, but he gets some targets and definitely takes routes. Justin Watson has still been running routes ahead of Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney. So for me, I like the talent is great. Playing with Patrick Mahomes is great, but there's just not room for that consistent target outlook.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But a 15% target share in Kansas City is different than a 15% target share pretty much anywhere else because the elevated passing volume, because you're playing with Patrick Mahomes. So I don't think Moore will be the same consistent every week, 15 plus point producer, but I think he could be someone you start as a wide receiver 3 and get some big games down the stretch. Justin Watson, by the way, ran her out on 98% of the pass plays last week. If Juju is still out and Toney is out, Justin Watson could be a guy you turn to this week in deeper leagues.
Mm-hmm. The Packers, Jared, we've got Allen Lazard, we've got Christian Watson. Does Allen Lazard belong ahead of Christian Watson in the week 12 rankings and beyond?
I think so. Christian Watson has scored a touchdown on 5 of his 8 catches over the past 2 games. He saw 6 targets last week, a 15% target share. Allen Lazard saw 11 targets, 28% of the team's targets. Lazard has 8.2 targets on a 23% target share over the last 5 games. To me, he's still the better volume bet. Watson obviously gives you more upside weekly. I think Lazard is still going to be the steadier option the rest of the way. Tough matchup for both guys this week against the Eagles. Watson's lower in our wide receiver rankings than you'd probably expect him to be. He'd be a tough guy to sit. But, again, with the usage and the type of player he is and in the matchup, I would not be surprised if he duds this week.
Plus, against this defense, it's going to be a little tougher to set up the long plays that are really the advantage for Watson than it might be in other spots. I would say the one thing I feel most comfortable about is taking the under on Aaron Rodgers' passing yards and underdog pick'ems.
The Eagles are first defending deep passes, according to Football Outsiders. You can kind of attack them short, but they don't give up deep passes. They're third in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. So, again, definitely a tough spot for Watson. A bit better of a spot for Lazard, who does play in the slot a little bit. That's kind of where you want to attack the Eagles. But even Lazard this week, I think it's just a wide receiver 3.
Yeah. Speaking of young wide receivers with upside, though, Treylon Burks, we got some numbers from him last Thursday night. I love the target share. I love the big production. I'm a little bit wary of the route rate decline in that game, though.
Yeah, 68% last week after being 75% in his week 10 return. That's definitely lower than we'd like to see. It could rebound again. I wouldn't be surprised. It's really like Burks saw 28% of the Titans targets in that Thursday night game. Like he needs to be like in the mid 20s to have like fantasy viable volume, just because the Titans throw it so little. I think he could be there. So I think he's good. And I think the Titans' other wide receivers are not good at this point. So he could get 25% of the targets going forward. He's going to be volatile. But there could be spike weeks the rest of the way because he's just so talented.
Yes, I agree with that. He's the player that I want as opposed to Sky Moore, because I think there's a better chance that he is his team's lead receiver. And even though, lead receiver in Tennessee might not be that far ahead of third receiver in Kansas City in terms of targets you get every week, there's definitely something to being the first option. And I do think that he'll be a better bet for weekly targets.
Yep, I prefer Burks for sure if Juju is back this week. If Juju and Toney are out, I think I'd lean Sky Moore as a starter over Burks this week.
Cardinals might get Marquise Brown back this week. What's the latest you've heard on that one?
I haven't heard anything lately. He practiced last week. Seemed like he had a shot, and then there was a report before the Monday night game that he was kind of aiming at week 12 as his return date. The Cardinals do have a week 13 bye, which could factor into the decision. They can, hold Brown out for 2 more weeks. So we're just going to have to, we can't even track his practice participation level because he's still on IR. So it's a tough situation. We'll at least know by Saturday afternoon if he's going to play. And then again, Rondell Moore and Greg Dortch are hurt right now. So you might get 50% target share for DeAndre Hopkins this weekend.
And both quarterbacks are hurt right now. So we have no idea who's playing for the Cardinals besides James Conner on Sunday. We're just going to have to watch this team and see what's happening.
Yep.
Finally, in the wide receiver section, Darius Slayton, 58 plus receiving yards in 4 straight games and 5 of the 7 games this season in which he has gotten any targets. Darius Slayton seems like somebody who has the potential to help us. It's a tough matchup for him this week. He'll probably see lots of Trayvon Diggs.
Darius Slayton's pretty good. He had a good rookie year, then he just disappeared for some reason. Now he got a chance again this year, and he's delivering again. 21% target share over his last 4 games, and now no Wan'Dale Robinson, who is the clear 1B to Slayton over the past month. So Slayton could get even more targets going forward. Low volume passing game with iffy quarterback play adds risk, but I think Slayton could be a wide receiver 3 the rest of the way.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. On to tight end, and rather than go one by one through these guys, because it's really more of a this guy against that guy, we've got Taysom Hill, we got Greg Dulcich, Foster Moreau, Dawson Knox up first. And Jared, it seemed last week like maybe it was time to forget about Taysom Hill, but did the Saints change that?
So Hill played a season high in offensive snaps last week, 24. His 9 carries were the second most of the season. And then Dennis Allen said after the game that it was their plan to get him more involved going forward, which I don't know why that stopped being the plan at any point, because he has been probably their at least the top 3 weapon in that offense all season. So I do think Hill is kind of back in that mix where if you don't have a locked in starter, his floor is low, but he has as much upside as anyone outside the top 2 or 3 tight ends.
Plus, if he is going to get, 7, 8 plus carries, that gives him a decent floor versus the other running backs that we're talking about. And certainly running backs, that's like a subconscious thing because that's where the upside comes. And with all these tight ends, we're basically hoping for a shot at a touchdown. So if it's somebody who is going to get a pass attempt here and there and can also be a red zone option on the ground, he's very similar. It's not in the same way, but it ultimately makes him very similar as an option to all these other low tight end 1 types.
Yeah, Niners matchup this week. The Saints should go into that trying to control the ball on the ground because if Dalton's dropping back behind that O-line against that pass rush, I don't think it's going to go very well.
Greg Dulcich, Foster Moreau, Dawson Knox, more traditional tight ends, all have their issues, all have some upside. Anybody in that trio that you're favoring right now, Jared?
Knox, just because the Bills have a 32-point implied total tomorrow, which I think is the highest number we've seen all season. Dawson Knox's route rate has been up for a while, in the 70s or 80s where we want it. The targets hadn't been great, but he has 13 of them over the past 2 weeks at 18.5% target share. So, if he can stay anywhere near that level, he's going to be a weekly fantasy starter. Moreau is the tough one for me. His routes were way down last week, 61%. He pass blocked way more than he had been. I don't know if that was a matchup thing or what. It obviously makes him a scary fantasy play, but he gets Seattle, who has been, one of the best tight end matchups all season. So Moreau is, to me, the toughest call at tight end this week.
Yeah, Foster Moreau and Greg Dulcich both stand as guys that you shouldn't reach over anybody for. And I made the mistake with Dulcich last week. It's one of those that you can explain it away and it's not a terrible decision, but I played him over Pat Freiermuth. They were right next to each other in our PPR rankings, lost a matchup because of that decision. We only got 4 catches, 30 yards for Dulcich, had another strong route rate, 84%, had a great matchup against the Raiders. I was thinking the targets have to go somewhere. We've got Cortland Sutton, we've got Greg Dulcich, and I don't know who else. So it almost has to be at least a positive game for Dulcich, whereas the Steelers are playing the Bengals and could do absolutely nothing passing. But I forgot to properly weigh how crappy these Broncos are.
Yeah, starting Dulcich wasn't the mistake. It was benching Freiermuth, who, he just needs to be locked in the lineups at this point. He's consistently getting 20+% target shares when he's been healthy this season. But even last week, 16% target share for Dulcich. You mentioned the route rate was still fine. His usage is still there. It's just, Denver's offense is holding him back like it is everyone.
Yep, and I definitely need to factor that in, which I've been, complaining about all year. I let it get the better of me this particular time. Foster Moreau, no catches last week until that 33-yarder in overtime. So I would like to not use him if
Yeah.
possible. And that's certainly not been a passing game that has told us we need to get pieces of it. It's one that's been better to avoid this year if possible, outside of Devontae Adams, obviously.
Yes.
And then finally, more like streaming level options, although David Njoku doesn't really fit that level. He's down there because of what's going on right now. He returned last week from his knee injury, but ran behind Harrison Bryant. So what are we feeling with David Njoku right now?
Yeah, last week was another good week for fading guys coming off high ankle sprains, right? We had Njoku limited. We had Mike Williams aggravated in the first quarter. So to me, like as much as I love Njoku and how good he was early this season, like I need to see him back close to pre-injury level usage before I'm trying to get him into the fantasy lineup. Maybe you have to. The upside still there. I do think his usage is going to climb now going forward if he avoids a setback. But again, I'd rather see it before using him.
Yeah, and we will start to get a look at that with the practice participation. Last week, it was no practice Wednesday, limited Thursday, limited Friday. Then he was questionable for the game. So we should have headed in thinking, all right, we don't have full Njoku back, and we certainly didn't get full Njoku. So we'll see how he practices this week and see how he improves, both in usage and production going forward. Otherwise, Trey McBride, somebody who got extra usage last week, Logan Thomas. Trey McBride, like obviously a rookie tight end in what's been a lackluster offense and without its starting quarterback. Not somebody to get excited about, but it's a little disappointing they only got 9% target share in that first full game with all that playing time after Zach Ertz. It's even more disappointing to me, Jared, that he somehow turned 4 catches into just 14 yards. Like I took the over on his 19.5 yards, knowing that it wasn't a safe bet by any means. But if you had told me before the game he's going to catch 4 passes, I'd be like, sweet, give me my money.
Yeah, they used him like they were using Zach Ertz, where they should be using Trey McBride downfield more. So we'll see if that changes. This has kind of been McBride's story so far, even going back to the preseason. Like he runs all these routes, but he just doesn't get targeted. So it's still a tiny sample we're looking at that could definitely change the rest of the way. To me, McBride is someone I'd consider if Rondale Moore and Greg Dortch are both out. Then I think it'd kind of be like who's left, and I think McBride would be a pretty decent bet for volume.
I think McBride's somebody you consider if you're like, oh crap, I need a tight end and there are none left, but Trey McBride's there.
I spent a lot of money on that guy in FFPC leagues. I got to get a return on my investment.
Logan Thomas is another one that might not be ready to give a whole lot of return on investment. The route rates have been good the past couple of games, but last week found him 4th in that category behind Jahan Dotson, who elevated coming back from his hamstring injury. It was his second game back from that. And, similar to what we were saying with the target rate in Kansas City, I think in this particular offense, you need more than just a solid route rate and being 4th on the team there to actually be attractive for fantasy in Washington.
Yeah, Thomas, kind of got there last week because he saw 22% of Washington's targets. You can't bet on that type of target share going forward. He saw 14% the previous week. I think that's closer to what we can expect. The matchup's good for Logan Thomas. The Falcons are 26th against tight ends, but the matchup's good for everyone on Washington's offense. I'm with you. It's going to be a run-heavy game plan, and then Terry McLaurin remains the clear top guy in this passing game. So Thomas, well outside our top 12, but he's decent because of the matchup if you need a tight end streamer.
Yeah, and once you get outside the top 12 at this point, it's like, yeah, sure, that guy might be fine. Sure, play that guy. They all stink if they're outside the top 12 tight ends at this point. Let's close this out, Jared, with the favorite defense streamer that might actually still be out there right now. I got the Colts and Chiefs at sub 50%, according to ESPN league ownership. I know that that's not the best read on what's actually available in serious leagues at this point in the year, though.
Yeah, I think there are quite a few good spot starters this week. The Chiefs and Colts were available in some of the FFPC leagues I'm in. The Chiefs played the Chargers last week, so I don't think many people started them there. So they definitely could be available. I think the Steelers on the other side of that Colts game, I still think Indy can be an upside matchup for defenses. Pittsburgh obviously has gotten TJ Watt back over the past couple of weeks, so that adds upside. The one D I wanted to mention, and they're not super high in our rankings this week, but Seattle has just been a good real life defense and a pretty good fantasy defense for a while now. Not a great matchup against Vegas. Carr just doesn't take a lot of sacks, doesn't turn over a whole lot. But I think Seattle's a decent play this week, and then the following 2 weeks they get the Rams and Panthers. So I think you could grab Seattle now. Again, I think they're okay this week, and I think they'll be probably a top 5 defense each of the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I like that. They had a rough game against the Bucks last time out, but several straight games as one of the top defenses in the league before that. So I would bet on them in that matchup. I think for this week specifically, the Vikings are just 21.7% owned in ESPN leagues. They're home to play the Patriots, who have been the 4th most generous scoring matchup for fantasy defenses, according to our adjusted fantasy points allowed. Vikings defense was terrible last week against the Cowboys. They lost you 8 points by ESPN scoring. I don't think that the downside is really that low most weeks. And before that game, they had 4 straight good ones, including a game at Buffalo where nobody would have had any business starting them. The touchdown obviously helped in that game, but they also had 4 total takeaways and 3 that were not a dropped snap at the goal line.
Yep, I like that call. I think that's going to be a ugly defensive battle tomorrow night. Miami is also available in quite a few leagues coming off a bye week. They're massive home favorites for Houston and Kyle Allen on Sunday. So I think the Dolphins are a good week 12 spot start.
I agree with that. And that's going to do it for this week 12 preview edition of the podcast. As you're sitting around in your food coma Thursday, be sure to check our updated rankings for lineup recommendations, as well as our favorite prop bets across the league. Click the links at the bottom of this podcast post, wherever you're getting it, for deposit matches on Underdog and on Sleeper. And if you have any final lineup questions that are lingering that you're struggling with, tap into our community on Discord. Come join for free. You can get advice on who to use. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.